This episode is brought to you in association with Love Raw. Hi and welcome to an episode of Can I Make a Dessert based on a very popular soft drink? I was eating my lunch the other day and I had one of the little individual tarts I made from the Love Seitan chicken type seitan. And I really loved the amount of pastry that I had because it was in one of the little individual ones. And I thought, oh, I'd like to make more of these mini things. I do like small food, it makes me feel like a giant. And I thought it would be nice to try doing a little individual sweet sort of tart. And then got thinking, all right, what am I going to put in that? So my mind then went to the citrus custard that I made in the James Beer sponge cake. And thought, oh, I wonder if I could use that to make like a creme patissiere in the inside of the tart and then put some fruit in that. And then I thought, well, I'll do grapefruit juice because I'm on a bit of a grapefruit kick at the moment. I do enjoy it, especially in that custard. It was amazing. So I thought, right, I'll do that. What flavour goes with that? And then I remembered Lilt. So this is Lilt, a popular soft drink in the UK, and it's pineapple and grapefruit flavoured. So what I'm going to do is make grapefruit custard and then really finely slice a pineapple and arrange that inside the tart. Hopefully, in my head it's going to look like a flower. We'll see, we'll see. And the pastry itself, I'm going to put some desiccated coconut in there. So it's going to have some really nice tropical flavours. I'm going to use some of the ingredients that Love Raw sent me and use those to make the tart. So they sent me some pastry flour. You can use any type of flour for this, so don't get too worried about it if you can't find pastry flour in particular. It just gives a slightly more delicate texture to the case. 175 grams of pastry flour. I'll do the conversions in the edit for you rather than messing around with cups at this point. And this is the same ratio that I used for the chocolate and chestnut sweet potato tart. And then I'm just changing the ingredients, so hopefully that'll work. 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and this just brings a little bit of extra flavour. They sent me this coconut sugar, and I haven't tried baking with it yet. I've only used it, I used it in some panna cotta. I put a little bit in that, but this will be the first time sort of baking with it. 75 grams of the coconut sugar. I've got 50 grams of desiccated coconut. Now these pieces are quite big, so what I'm going to do is put it in the coffee grinder just to get it slightly finer. It doesn't need to be a powder or anything, but I think it would benefit from just being a bit smaller. Put this in the coffee grinder. I might do it in 2 batches just to give it enough room really. Gone much finer. It's more like a ground almond now. Add this into the sieve. Because nuts contain a high amount of fat, you'll find it cakes up in the grinder. It's fine, just scrape it out. And sieve these together. And then mix it together really well. Combine everything. I'm using 150 grams of coconut oil, and this is a refined one, so it doesn't have the coconut flavour. But obviously in this kind of pastry, feel free to use just regular coconut flavoured coconut oil. And because I'm going to rub the oil into the pastry, I'm just going to scoop it out in kind of chunks. Any excess oil, rub it on your elbows. Moisturiser. I'll add the coconut oil into the pastry and then rub it together. It's a very warm day and I'm also very hot at the moment, so everything's melting quite quickly. And I've not used coconut oil for pastry before, so I'm going to have to see how this goes. I might have to adapt as I go on. I'm going to do half of the oil and see how that gets on. Kind of break it into smaller pieces. And then with your fingertips, just pinch the dry mixture into the oil. Now, see, the texture is already quite breadcrumby, crumbs rather than powder. So I'm umming and ahhing whether I need to put more oil in because I don't want it to be too fatty. So just go through and double check you haven't got any big clumps of coconut oil. And I've got a glass of cold water there. I'm going to add 1 tablespoon at a time until it holds together. So this is where it's at the moment. It is a little bit too crumbly still. So I'm going to try and roll the pastry out and see how it's looking. And these are the tins that I'm going to use. These are non-stick, so if you don't have non-stick, you might want to grease the outside, although there might be enough coconut oil in the pastry that you don't need to. I'm going to roll it on silicone mats, but it is sticking a little bit, so I will just dust the bottom one a tiny bit. Because I'm going to try and lift the pastry up, it just breaks apart. Pack it into a ball, and flatten it. That's about the thickness I want. So it's a couple mil, 2-3 mils. Get the tin. You bugger. Alright, so this is going to be, I guess, a patchwork job. Just go around, make sure every bit of it is covered. Don't worry too much about splits and holes, because we're going to patch that in a second. We'll figure it all out. Try not to get really thick parts. Get a sharp knife to trim the top. Trimming it will also help you see if you've got any really thick bits. So just keep refining it. Make sure you get well into the corners. Once it's in the tin, I've got a fork, so I'm just going to punch little holes in, and this helps to let steam escape so it doesn't puff up at the bottom. As soon as I've done each one, I'm going to put it in the fridge so they can chill down a bit. It's time to bake the pastry. I'm going to blind bake it first with some baking beans in, and what that does is it helps compress the bottom. So I've got 4 pieces of greaseproof that are scrunched up. That helps fit it into the corners so it's not quite as stiff. Push the paper into the bottom, smooth out any major creases. Spoon in some beans. And this is a mixture of red lentils, barley, mung beans, chickpeas, just what I had in the cupboard to hand. You can use rice even, I've done that before. I'll put these into my preheated oven, so at 160, and I've got granola in there as well, so I just need to change some stuff around. The granola is to go on top of my apple pie spaghetti. Put those in 15 minutes, and then I will take out the paper and baking beans and then let them go for another 15-20 minutes until they're nice and crisp. I need to bake the tart cases all the way through because there won't be a filling to go in and then baked. So they need to be crispy, then I can do the filling and put the rest of it on. I'm going to make up the kind of custard powder that I'll use for the creme patissiere filling. So I've got 100 grams of granulated sugar. It's not super fine, but it's got some size to it. And then 70 grams of oats. They're just regular, cheap as chips type of oats. And then 80 grams of cashew nuts. And these are going to give some nice creaminess. So I'll put all of the oats and cashews in, and then I'll put half of the sugar. I'm kind of using the recipe that I did with the jammy custard, the custard for that. I'm kind of tweaking that a little bit. And I think using a larger grain sugar acts as a bit of an abrasive to blend it down and make it smoother. So I'll blend this for a while, and then I'll add the rest of the sugar in just to help get extra lumps out. Did this for 30 seconds, so I'm just going to move it around in there. Just make sure you sort of wiggle the blades around because it can get trapped underneath. Like sand at the moment, and I want it down to a fine powder. I'll blast it for another 30 seconds and do the same. And I'll put the remaining sugar in and blast it for another 30 seconds. Now I am getting powder on the lid, so it is capable of going very fine. So again, scrape the sides, move it around. So the texture, if I can get my hand in shot for you, it's still a little bit sandy. Let's have a look at the tart cases. They've had about 15 minutes now. Lift the beans into a little dish. Okay, I'm gonna give them another 5 minutes. with the beans in. Also decided to put in 2 tablespoons of glutinous rice flour. This is also called sweet rice flour, just to see if that helps get the more of a powdery texture. Yeah, I think that's helping. Okay. So yeah, the original recipe that I used from Boussonneau Cooking, they used rice flour, so that's what's given me the thought to do that. Yeah, you can see lots of powdery build up on the lid. Check in on the tarts. And again, see the beans out. Yeah, that's looking a bit better. I don't know how well that's going to come out in the light. But the pastry doesn't look wet anymore, doesn't look damp. Pulled the others out, and now I'm just taking the beans out, setting those aside. Put them back in the oven for 10 minutes, and then I'll mix them around again just to get the baking even. So they might need 20 minutes, 30 minutes, something like that, just until they're all the way crisp. And I've decided what I'm going to do is sieve the powder that I've made, and then I can always coffee grind the remaining bits that are too lumpy. So I have a very fine sieve here, really, really fine. And then these bits that are too big to go through the sieve, just put them in a separate bowl. Sieving it like this isn't a crucial stage at all, so if you don't mind it a little bit bitty, it's absolutely fine. Just go ahead and skip this step. I'm going to do another 5 minutes for luck, and then I'll take them out and put them on a cooling rack.
To get your own box of delicious Love Raw goodies, head over to eatloveraw.com and use code Auntie Rachel to get 10% off your first order.
I'm going to crack on with the custard now because that needs time to cool back down again. I'm using 3 red grapefruits. Use any kind you like. I don't think there is actually any difference. We just perceive there to be a difference. So yeah, and I just thought the pink might be kind of visually quite nice, even though it's going to be riddled with pineapple. I'm going to measure the amount of juice as well. And that'll be nice and precise for you. So I've got just over 350 mils of grapefruit juice, and I've taken the pulp and the seeds out, just so it's really nice smooth consistency. I'll start this warming on a gentle heat. Grapefruit juice is now hot, so it's time to start adding in the custard powder. Start with 2, I suppose. Now 3. And I made way more custard powder than I needed, but it's fine because that can go in the cupboard and then be pulled out whenever I want a treat. Once you start adding the powder in, try not to walk away from it because it's going to start sticking on the bottom and caking, and it'll just get really gooey and lumpy. So I think that is probably a good place to be, and it will thicken a little bit more as it cools down. I'm trying to decide if it's better to let that cool down and then put it in the pastry, or put it in the pastry now. So if I let it cool down, it's going to be a bit more tricky to get it into the shells. But if I put it in hot, it might make the pastry soggy. I'm going to let it cool. Yeah, I'm going to let it cool down. Because I'm not so bothered about the appearance, because the pineapple's going to be in there. It doesn't matter if it's lumpy. So yeah, I think that's going to be the safer thing to do. Preserve the integrity of the pastry. That's lovely. I've deliberately kind of held back a bit on the sugar, but do feel free to add some icing sugar in there, anything like that, that's fine. But because I'm going to put some sugar on the top of the pineapple and then caramelize it, I just didn't want it to be sugar after sugar after sugar after sugar, because the case will also be a little bit sweet as well. Onto the pineapple prep. Now the sharper your blade is, the easier this part's going to be, because we need quite fine slices. So I'm going to sharpen. I use this little gizmo that kind of vacuum locks onto the worktop, and then you just drag the blade through the sharpener. I just find it makes it much easier than having to use a whetstone. So cut off the top and bottom. This is admittedly not as ripe as I'd like, but that's what they have in the shop, so that's what I'm using. And I think actually being underripe will help me cut it a bit thinner. Once the top and bottom are off, I then use the blade and you're kind of curling the knife around slightly. You need to get rid of these eyes, because they're going to make your tongue go numb. So there's the core, which is rock hard and unpleasant to eat. So slice to either side of that. And kind of let your knife do the work. You'll feel it against the blade. I'm going to do 2 long sides. And then trim off those. And then that leaves the central core. So I want very fine slices, really like a millimetre. That's, if I can get it in shot, that's about how thin. So that is, yeah, 1.5 millimetres, 2 millimetres. If you're ever stuck for dessert ideas, finely slice a pineapple like this and then grind together some sugar and fresh mint. Just do it in a pestle and mortar and sprinkle that over. It's delicious. The custard's still quite warm, so I'm going to tidy down a bit and yeah, we'll pick it back up. It's time to start filling up the tarts. Now, I've just had an absolute disaster with my piping bag. If I manage to capture it on camera, I'll show you. But basically, when I was squeezing the apple puree for the apple pie spaghetti that I've made, the bag ruptured. So it's left me with a bit of a puzzle of how to get this into the tart cases neatly. So that's where we're at. It's very, very thick, but I'll think of something. But I tell you what, it was so worth it. Look at this. Look at that. I'm obsessed. So that's just apple puree and some sodium alginate. And that's given me so many ideas. I can make noodles out of anything. Yay! I think what I'll do is whip it, see what happens. And that might introduce some air into it and to make it a little bit easier to manipulate. Oh, goodness. Ow, my whiskers are broken. Yeah, I think that might be okay actually. So I've got my tarts and they have come out of the shell nice and easily, out of the case I should say, not the shell. And the nice crisp. I think I'm going to leave them in the cases just to provide a bit of extra stability as I work them. What I'm going to do is cut strips of baking paper because the pastry is quite brittle. So if I leave them in the tin, that'll give it some structure. Cut some thin strips of baking paper. And then I can lift it out like that. Lob it in. And do be mindful not to overfill it, because once you start putting pineapple in there, it's going to take up even more room. All right, pineapple time. So for the center bit, you want to find a really thin one and then just twist it around into a little rosette like that, and then wrap another piece around, and that forms the center structure. Pop that in, and don't worry too much about the inside because we're gonna zhuzh it around afterwards. Start sliding in more slices. You really just need to gently push it down. And work in sections, in layers. And if there's any empty bits as you move it around, just fill the gaps. That's come out exactly how I hoped it would. I can't believe I pulled it off. Oh, nice. So I've had to order a pizza because it's 7 o'clock. There's no chance I'm cooking right now. So I'm going to eat my pizza and this is going to be my dessert. So I'll see you back in a little bit. It's time to eat the tart. Yay! I'm going to sprinkle on some demerara sugar. It's this stuff. It's quite large crystals. And then blowtorch it just to give a nice bit of extra colour and a bit of extra sweetness and some crunch. So scattering on probably a quarter of a teaspoon. So do a little section, move away, let it cool down. So that's given it a lovely extra dimension of colour and life, I think. It's kind of, yeah, just added to the realism of it. I'm going to cut it in half, fully appreciate the pink inside. So you get little glimpses of the pink middle, which is really very pretty. Get stuck in. That's gorgeous. Hands down, I think that's the best dessert I've ever made. It's full of flavour, but it's really delicate and nothing's overpowering anything else. The pastry could maybe be a touch lighter, so perhaps do it on 150 degrees. That might bake it without giving it so much colour. But apart from that, gorgeous. The texture of the pineapple is really nice because you've got that then silky, soft creaminess from the filling, from the grapefruit filling, and then crunch from the tart case. My goodness. Now the strapline for Lilt is totally tropical taste. And my goodness, this is a totally tropical taste. That's just like sunshine on a plate. You could easily adapt that for different fruits. So you could do mango slices with perhaps a lime creme pat. That would be really nice. All sorts of possibilities there. Just adapt and change and play and experiment. For more soft drink inspired recipes, hit subscribe and tap the bell icon, and that way they'll slide straight into your inbox.